If I ever have 1 week left to live, I want to live through 15 speaker votes. It was the longest week of my life, but it was a healthy week for our party because Republicans are united in making sure that there's never a speaker again like Nancy Pelosi who abuses her power and position.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Republican Study Committee Pass the Gavel Ceremony and Conversation. Please welcome the president of the Heritage Foundation, Dr. Kevin Roberts.
We have a special event today, and it's special in and of its own merit, which is a passing of the gavel from the outgoing chairman of the Republican Study Committee to the new chairman. But for those of you familiar with the history of the Republican Study Committee, which our longtime friend and colleague Lee Edwards has prepared a history of to be released later this year, you know that the RSC and the Heritage Foundation share a long history and friendship. In fact, our other longtime friend and colleague, and equally young gentleman, Dr. Ed Fulner, once was affiliated with the RSC before becoming president of the Heritage Foundation, where he served, as you know, even though you're still a young guy, Ed, for 36 years. So round of applause for Dr. Fulner, who's got a real important history of both. Ed and I were joking, comparing our respective heritage ties, he wearing a pink tie, if you can't see it, I with a red tie. And he said, Roberts, you're ever the optimist still pulling for the red wave. Whereas he is representing the pink ripple, which was more realistic. That's still a little bit of a sensitive topic, I understand, but here at Heritage, we relish in talking about sensitive topics, like the assault on self-governance and freedom in this country and around the world, but especially in the last several years in the imperial city of Washington, D.C. K Street lobbyists hate it when I say that because they know that it's true. So let me say it again, the imperial city of Washington, D.C. What I love about the Republican Study Committee is its zealous commitment to changing that through substantive policy and great messaging. And so just as we have done in the past, particularly with the outgoing chairman, whom I'll introduce momentarily, we look forward to a very strong friendship with the incoming chairman, also a longtime friend of Heritage. So let me introduce them. They are the stars of the show. It's simply my job today to facilitate a really good conversation. So please join me momentarily in welcoming these two men, but permit me a moment to introduce each of them. The outgoing chairman is a wonderful friend, Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana. Jim, a veteran of the armed forces, is someone who is thoughtful inside the Capitol, outside the Capitol. We know that in the present and in the future, he will continue to be a great voice, both on the policy front, but also, as I've come to know him, on the intellectual front, sort of Heritage's lane. And so we look forward to continuing to work with Jim Banks. Incoming as chairman of the Republican Study Committee is Congressman Kevin Hern of the great state of Oklahoma, also with Arkansas roots, which means he's just our kind of guy. Wonderful entrepreneur, someone who probably will encourage Jim Banks, who does have a coffee addiction, to spend more of his money on coffee from McDonald's, being a McDonald's franchisee. So we're going to sit down and have a great conversation as friends, but we're also, to my point about sensitivity, going to be talking about the future, unabashedly, because ultimately what we do here at Heritage and what the Republican Study Committee does in focusing on self-governance is more timely than ever. Join me in welcoming Jim Banks and Kevin Hern.
Yeah, welcome. Well, Congressman Banks, you never disappoint with the caffeine. I'm really impressed.
I need a lot of it. I have 3 daughters, as you know.
Yes.
13, 11, and 9. I drink a lot of coffee just to get through the day.
Well, my chief of staff, Wes Cooper Smith, who's a friend of yours, says, Kevin, the only person who drinks more coffee than you is Jim Banks. And it's the same reason. Well, look, to cut to the chase, let me start with gratitude. And I know Congressman Hern would say the same thing because he's stepping into your shoes. You've done a great job as chairman of the Republican Study Committee. That is both a job with a lot of privileges, meaning you've got a voice and a platform to talk about policy, but it's also one where you got to make some tough calls. And so as you're reflecting on your tenure, which is coming to a close imminently, what's on your mind?
Well, I love doing it. Republican Study Committee is an important institution in the Congress. And we started the term trying to restore it back to its roots of what Ed Fulner envisioned that it would be 50 years ago. I didn't want to say it out loud, but as the intellectual arsenal for conservatism on Capitol Hill in the Congress, and I think we did that. The RSC team, many of the staff members, former and present, are in the audience today. They made me look good. But I also had good training from former chairman, too. Mark Walker was the chairman of RSC when I was a freshman. Scott Parkinson was the executive director of RSC back then. They put me on the RSC steering committee as a freshman member. And that was kind of my upbringing, and I got to observe how Mark led, Mike Johnson led after him. The one lesson that I learned that I'll tell you that Kevin Hern has already taken to the next level is that the RSC steering committee is the key to making RSC relevant for conservative policy, because the RSC steering committee is who takes positions on legislation and important overall political decisions for the Republican Study Committee. Mark Walker did a good job at this. Mike Johnson did a good job at this. But what I learned from it is you have to surround yourselves on that governing board with principled conservatives who are not afraid of leadership to go against the grain and take the tough positions. And we did that last term. We took 20-something positions in my term as chairman. And I know Kevin Hern's going to do exactly the same thing, because the rest of the conference, especially the leadership, they know that RSC is the heart and soul of the conference, and when we plant the flag, that's where leadership knows that the conservative position is to be. So we did that on the fake infrastructure bill. We were the first ones to get out and take a position against it, and it took a while. It took longer than what I would have liked, but leadership eventually arrived against it, and Steve Scalise, the whip at the time, came to the RSC meeting symbolically to make it known that leadership was going to whip against the fake infrastructure bill as well. The very first position that we took, that most of my colleagues got wrong at the beginning of the Congress, we took a position against giving Secretary Austin the waiver to allow him to become the Secretary of Defense. And I bet every one of my Republican colleagues who voted for that waiver regret it today, because of the wokeness in the military, what's going on in the military. Today proved us right. So long story short, the lesson that I learned is when RSC leans in, the conference and leadership follows, and I know under Kevin Hern's leadership, they're going to lean in even more than ever before.
I agree with that, and thank you so much, Jim, for your leadership. Congressman Kevin Hern, thanks for being willing to step into this important role. We've met over the last couple of weeks talking about your priorities and heritages, and we know among several issues that we'll work on together will be fiscal restraint. So much so that just before starting this event, I noticed you published something on Fox News about that very priority. So my question for you, sir, is to speak to that, the timeliness of it, dare I say the urgency. I know it's a great passion of yours, fiscal restraint, but also what other priority issues do you see the Republican Study Committee focusing on under your leadership?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, and thank you for what you're doing here at Heritage and the role that you've been in now, I guess a year roughly. I just want to give a big shout out to Jim Banks for the role he's done. It's been a real honor to serve on RSC in the last 4 years, certainly the last 2 years being the RSC budget chair. I would argue that the RSC does a more in-depth look at the budget than any other person or entity in all of Congress. Richard Stern, one of your members, is here that works so passionately on that. And then Mark, Mark's here somewhere working on that now with us as we move forward, actually producing a balanced budget. And it's incredibly important. This is what the election was all about with the American people, with the inflationary issues. What we saw last week was centered on reining in spending and empowering the voice of the members of Congress. The RSC will play an integral role in underlying financial security of this country as we go forward. As Jim mentioned, none of us could do our job in any leadership position without great people around us. You have great people here at Heritage. Many have come from RSC, as a matter of fact.
That is true.
Even Ed, right? Yeah. Employee number one. But it's been great to get to know him and listen to the podcast and the things that he's talked about. I think it is a little different today than certainly in my 4 years in Congress, where I've been in the minority the whole time, because we pushed back on really bad decisions made by the White House, certainly in the last 2 years. And Jim mentioned General Austin on some of the craziness things and the things he's been doing, whether it's some decisions he's made related to the social activity, whether it's vaccination issues and things go on. But as we go into the majority and the American people are looking for leadership on particular issues, we're going to be on the steady from a conservative front. You can count on us, certainly with the staff we have, the people that work on RSC, the membership have been getting this message. I've been meeting one-on-one with several new members to help them understand the importance of RSC and what it means to be a member. My goal is never been to be about me. It's about helping everybody else be successful. I learned after 35 years of business that if it was always about me, I was never going to go very far. And so when I learned about helping others be successful, it was amazing how the organizations that I owned, ran, associated with were successful. I see the same thing playing out here in the RSC. I've shared with every member that I want them to leave the RSC, or me to leave the RSC in 2 years, them looking back saying, my goodness, I don't know how I could have ever made it in Congress if I had not been on the RSC. That it's made me a better legislator. It's made me more informed. And as an example of that, we're going to move in parallel with the conference on issues like the budget window. And we start today with CBO Director Philip Swagel being our inaugural speaker for our first luncheon to help the members understand how this process works in Congress, how the federal government is funded, so that we have a very, very informed 170 members of the Republican Conference. It's exciting. Look forward to it. Look forward to being in this role for the 2 years we have it. And again, I want to thank you always. You always are challenged by the person you follow. And so I just want to thank Congressman Banks for his confidence in me and allowing me to chair the Budget Committee for 2 years and the great leadership he did.
Well, as I tell people outside Washington, and like the two of you, try to spend as much time with what I call real people, not that there aren't real people in D.C., as possible. Each of you, and this is a similarity, therefore, has a real focus on the everyday American. And it seems to me that that's always important in Congress, but it's especially important right now. And there are a number of directions we can go with that comment, but the one that's on my mind, I know it is on yours, and I mean this to be a question about the future, not about the recent past. Given what happened last week with the speaker vote and the rules package, and you know where Heritage was on that, celebrating the transparency, room for differences of opinion among friends on that, of course. Looking ahead, you even make this point, Kevin, in your Fox News op-ed today, that if we're focused on the policy, that might be very unifying for the conference. Is that what you're seeing in the days following that vote? Is this something that people in the audience, but more importantly, people outside D.C. who are still trying to make sense of what happened last week can look forward to in a very positive way?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's probably no more singular question asked of all the members of Congress, this right now in this part of the week, than what happened last week. And those who, talk about the media or talk about the news that are in the media, some classify it as 20 people that were rogue, and others talk about, well, this is not good for America. I would argue that the American people were the winners in this, because for once the American people have tuned in to see what Congress used to be alike, before there were cameras, where you sit on the floor and you debated issues and things that mattered to the American people. And if it took 20 people to stand up to get people talking about fiscal irresponsibility, how we got to $31 trillion in debt, how we have wokeism throughout our schools and our businesses, how we have technology platforms that are censoring the First and Second Amendment issues we have out there also, all these things that are out there were brought forth. And I think the most important thing in all of this, though, was what was said and what's come out of this, and that's, again, emboldening and empowering the new members of Congress and all the general membership to have a broader voice in the conference and not just a top-down led organization.
Well, thanks for that response. Congressman Banks, a similar question for you, obviously can respond to that, but also want to add to that because you have taken some of your time to be focused on something Heritage does, perhaps distinctively, and that is the intellectual side of the movement. In other words, where we're doing our job well is when we're paying attention to, perhaps even initiating a lot of the big ideas, the context. our interaction with you and your staff and Kevin Hern and yours and other members helps us bring that to reality in partnership with you, given the fact that you have the advantage of hindsight now relative to being chairman of the RSC. Of course, you're still a member. What are the issues, one or two issues that you think are big opportunities for conservatives, in addition to the important issue of fiscal restraint, that might allow us not just to unify, but perhaps even more important than that, actually improve the quality of life for Americans?
Yeah, well, let me say, just back to Kevin's comments, if I ever have 1 week left to live, I want to live through 15 speaker votes. It was the longest week of my life, but it was a healthy week for our party because Republicans are united in making sure that there's never a speaker again like Nancy Pelosi who abuses her power and position. And that's, thank you. Last week was not about Kevin McCarthy. It was about that, never allowing that to happen again. And McCarthy can be a great speaker because he will recognize that his power doesn't come from the gavel, it comes from the members of Congress who elect him. When people complain about Republican leadership, I always explain to them as we're the ones that voted for Republican. The members and the Senate, the House members and the senators are the ones who voted for him, so blame us. And last week was a good example of, hopefully to the American people, to our activists, to our friends, our voters around the country, what I mean by that. As far as the question that you're asking is really important, and I got to say, Kevin, and I would say this if you weren't here, but you are here, so I will suck up. I am more excited than ever about the Heritage Foundation because of your vision, the leadership that you have provided here to recognize that this is a new moment in the conservative movement, and recognize not abandoning the conservative core principles of who we are and what we believe, but what I mean by that is we understand more than ever before that we are in a war for the future of this country. And I believe that war strikes at the heart of what is wokeism. What do we do about it? Wokeism is a cancer on this country. It will destroy America if we let it. We have to fight back against it. It's taken root in many of our institutions, not just in the government, but in corporate America. And this is where I think the focus moving forward for conservatives has to be, is to do everything that we can to uproot it out of our schools, and the military, the federal government, I think, is a chief sponsor and a big part of inspiring the woke movement. But we're seeing it take root in other places, and I look forward to partnering, because I know you understand this as well as anybody, with the Heritage Foundation to fight back against it.
Well, thanks. You're very kind. Kevin Hern said something similar to me in a private meeting about heritage, and he said, Roberts, I think you're pretty good at what you do because you go to McDonald's all the time. And there's a certain truth to that, actually. So I know y'all are both interested, far more as you should be, in questions from the audience than from me. And so we're going to turn to you with questions. And we've got a custom here at Heritage in wanting to get through as many questions as possible. So do me a favor and phrase your very brief comment in the form of an even briefer question. First question here. And just wait for the microphone coming your way. Thank you.
Hi, Bill Wichterman, former Hill staffer, now in private practice, but really concerned about and glad to hear, Congressman, your interest in the debt and deficits and spending, because it seems to me like it's one of the principal things facing a threat as a country. And I think for a lot of years, the party has gotten away from this, and we've got to get back to fiscal responsibility. Do you think that, my question for you is, do you think the people are there to support the kind of difficult choices that need to be made?
It's a great question. I will tell you that there's probably nothing more on the hearts and minds of the American people than why can't the federal government do what we do at home, which is balance our budgets. I mean, if you think about it, families, cities, states, communities all have to balance their budget. Only the federal government can spend wildly. So it's like you're representing people back home, but you're coming up here and doing something completely dishonest, which is not representing them. So we have no choice. I said on Saturday morning on a interview that two things that concern me are in this agreement that we're moving forward. One is that I love the fact that we're going to be voting on a balanced budget, and we've been given assurances that we'll get a chance to vote on the RSC budget, and show a conservative path forward to restoring fiscal restraint in this country. The second thing is that I think RSC has an opportunity is to create dialogue with the appropriators and the members, the broader members of the conference. We're going to represent about 75 to 80% of the entire conference, to bring them in early and often so that we can help fulfill Speaker McCarthy's agenda, which is passing 12 appropriation bills for the first time in many years, and send it to the Senate and see what happens over there. So we've got a twofold approach here, is to mirror what's going on in the conference and follow this fiscal education process, but also get to a point where we can get to 12 appropriation bills that we can push on that are the most conservative that we can push to the Senate.
Great question, response. Thank you. Young lady there has a question. Microphone's coming your way. Diana?
Hi, my name is Diana Furch-Scott-Roth. I'm director of the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment. You talked about the war on the American people. There's no better example than decarbonization, which is what the other side is talking about. They are unified among the executive branch agencies to talk about decarbonization, which means more use of green energy, not using Americans' natural resources, becoming dependent on China, and completely changing the American way of life. And I was wondering if you had any views about what your committee can do to study this and to fight back an area that they are brainwashing our kids about and are so unified about.
Well, I'm from Oklahoma. Next question. No, it's a great point. I'm an engineer also. So one would argue that I'm a scientist. Do I believe climate's changed? They've been changing since the beginning of this planet, and they will continue to change. The argument is what's causing it. What you're seeing now is the EU say, well, we got a little aggressive on going green. It's caused us a national security problem with Russia and China potentially, and certainly the Middle East. So we have to back up. What we've always been in this country is an all of the above energy solution country. From hydro, from the 40s, 50s, 60s onward, and then nuclear power plants, which have not been licensed since 1975, since the Nuclear Regulatory Commission became into existence. We have to look at new technologies. The reality is Oklahoma, the central point of. There's this big state down south of us I won't talk about right now.
Oh, we know that one, Congressman.
But,
come on now.
When you look at the impact of what we can have on the rest of the world in sending nice, beautiful, using the former president's words, nice, beautiful, clean energy around the world, we should be doing that. Yet this administration, the Democrat Party, wants to destroy that opportunity and still promote places like Iran and Venezuela and certainly other places that to produce really high carbonization energy and continue to pollute the world. And we've got to be against that. We've got to restore our energy independence, and that's what makes us strong. It's the central point of our our national security interests around the world.
Jim Banks, anything to add?
No, fundamentally important to the Republican agenda. It's the biggest promise that we made on the campaign trail, to make America energy independent again. And if we don't keep that promise, there will be hell to pay in 2024. So I think this is fundamentally important to focus on this. Republican Study Committee the last couple of years has been very focused, but will be even more so on Kevin Hern's watch.
Well, a mutual friend of all three of ours in the audience, former colleague of the two of you, has a question next. Congressman Mark Walker.
Thank you.
It's not fair to allow former members to ask questions.
Yeah, I know. And you could see the kind of devilish smile he has. This is going to be a doozy.
No. I remember being, when I was RSC chairman, we picked the best freshman in the group to be part of that steering committee, which was Jim Banks. And he did a tremendous job in helping us repeal Obamacare to fund Planned Parenthood, et cetera, et cetera. We were back in the days, and some of the staff here, when going against the omnibus wasn't the coolest thing in the world as it is now. But here's my question. I am sensing, I've been gone for 2 years, that there is a move in the conference that are taking more of these fiscal issues and more of a conservative bent. It just seems like we're trending that way. Is that a fair assessment? And certainly Heritage, the president here may want to weigh on that as far as your influence to help us get there. But I remember there were days, I was talking with Joanne and Scott a little earlier, where certain committees would send spies into the RSC to see how conservative we were going. Now it seems like that the RSC has had such an impact with staff, with other people, that we seem like we're tilting or trending the right direction. Is that your assessment, or is that something just a perception from the outside? Thank you.
Let me take a stab at that
Yeah.
first. I remember when I was a very new freshman member, and we were in the majority. We had a Republican president, Republican Senate. We long for those days again, but we screwed it up over and over again when we had that dynamic, which is why the voters didn't trust us to give us a bigger majority in this last election. But that's a side point. I was on the floor. We had one of the big CRs or omnibus bills or something, and leadership was pressuring us to vote for it. And I won't say who, but a very respected senior Republican member, I was sitting next to him, and he said, "Jim, when it's a Democrat president, we vote against it. When it's a Republican president, we vote for it." And I'll never forget that, because that's why we are where we are, $32 trillion national debt. We don't have a choice but to do something about it, yet we have so many members on both sides of the aisle that don't want to do the hard work of balancing the budget. RSC has always stood in the gap, right? I mean, this is RSC's legacy issue for 50 years since Dr. Fulner led the way in creating the Republican Study Committee. This is the issue where RSC leads in putting a balanced budget on the table. Kevin Hern's not giving himself enough credit. Kevin Hern and I both know the Republican leadership, as little as 2 or 3 months ago, were saying, no way is the RSC budget going to get a vote. There'll be one Republican budget, and it might be a 20-year budget, right?
Fact.
And Kevin Hern pushed the subject, and out of what came out of last week, got an agreement that the RSC budget will get a vote in this Congress. That is a big deal. That's only happened one time in the 6 years that I've been in Congress, that the RSC budget actually got voted on. And he's already showing tremendous leadership making it happen with that. So Kevin Roberts, that's what we get to go home and show all of the voters all over America. I see Jessica Anderson here. It's the Heritage Action type project to go show every voter at home, how did your member of Congress vote on the conservative budget to balance the budget and send us down a path to fiscal sanity again. We're going to get a chance to do that. That's exciting.
Yes, it is. I think, Mark, to your point, and it started, with many, chairs before, certainly Jim and I, but it's about being the steady conservative platform, regardless of the pressures that are put on members to get votes. Jim is correct in what he stated. It was pretty frustrating to be asked that, but it was fun to tell him no. We will not do a budget. And you didn't know if you were going to win, but I would rather lose on a principle that I believe in than win on compromising to things that I would not be happy with after winning the election. So here we are, and now the RSC budget is still that steady state of conservative principles. And while there have been critics of this from within our own conference, my response to that, it would be the response that I would ask any of you all to give, then put together a budget. Let's see it. I'm not saying it's the only way. It is a way. And if you have a different way of balancing the budget that is, brings forth where the real problems are, then bring it forward. We have yet to see that in certainly the 4 years that I've been here. And I'm proud to say, look at the RSC budget, and I will use the former speaker's words, show us your budget and we'll show you your values. Our values are a conservative America, a change in the direction of spending, restoring the economic freedoms that our future generations should have and could have if you get to a balanced budget and start living within your means.
We'll continue to take some audience questions, but I'd use my prerogative, if I may, to ask a follow-up question. And it's one of those sensitive points. And the motivation behind this question is to sort of commiserate about a challenge as conservatives with competing goods. And this is something that actively Heritage, including some colleagues sitting in here right now, are working on, and that is the desire on the one hand to reduce spending, and the desire on the other hand to make sure that our defense spending and foreign policy are appropriate. But those clash, in part because, I'll just say on behalf of everyone at Heritage Action, defense spending is reckless. It's reckless. That doesn't mean all of it is, but we as a movement have done a less than average job, so a poor job, and Heritage will take our credit for that too, our blame, so I'm not pointing fingers at the two of you for sure, at explaining what our strategy is with foreign policy, what our strategy is with certain defense munitions programs and planes that will never fly. And I don't have to tell the two of you, because I know the two of you well enough to know you see policy through the lens of the everyday American. Everyday conservatives have had it. And they really expect, now I'm putting a little bit of pressure on you, but I'm taking some of that pressure for Heritage too, to figure it out. You see Richard Stern nodding violently. Do we have a chance, right? Do we have a chance to figure this out together, members and the think tanks outside?
I'll tell you what I've always said, having been in business 35 years and worked on budgets from being the singular employee to working on budgets with franchisees all over the country, multi-billion-dollar budgets. The real issue is that if everybody will give a little, no one has to give a lot. The results will be the same. We will curb spending, we will pay for what we're supposed to pay for, and we'll get our fiscal house in order. Listen, there is no question that in every agency in America, whether it's defense, whether it's the VA, whether it's ag, the list goes on, there is wasteful spending. And we have to have a better look at this. The sad thing is that when we reach out as members of Congress and ask the OMB or ask a particular agency to give us what they're spending money on, the response, and I'm being a little bit flippant, but I'm not far off, we'll get back to you within the year. There have been requests that have been in play now for almost a decade that they still have not responded to. It's just so overwhelming or unwielding, however you want to look at it, that the monies are so great that that their thought is $1 billion here, 10 billion there, 100 billion there. It's not that big a deal. It is a big deal. It's the old saying, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and pretty soon you have real money. But I will tell you, every single dollar is the American taxpayer dollar. Every single dollar, for the most part today, in excess of about $4 trillion we're borrowing, because that's our revenue side, and we're spending $5.5 to $6 trillion a year. It's out of control, friends. And what we know in Congress, and we've seen in Congress, everybody is willing to cut somebody else's monies, their agencies, their special project, but don't cut mine, because I have to go back and report to my constituent. And I will just leave you with this. The person who got me involved in politics was a congressman who was leaving after a self-imposed term limits, a guy named Dr. Tom Coburn. And so you sort of know where my DNA is at.
That's great DNA, Congressman.
Yeah. I lived right next door to his mother-in-law, so I got a dose of this. And when he ran for Senate in 2004, I flew him all over the state. I'm a pilot, and it was just he and I. And so he told me when I ran for office, he asked me, he said, did you self-impose term limits? I said, I did not. He said, it doesn't matter. 6 years, you'll think the place is, it stinks anyway. It only took 4. Things are moving a little faster these days. But, we really have a lot of work to do together. It's a true honor to follow Jim Banks and the work he's done, to make bold positions when bold positions maybe weren't cool. In fact, he made so many bold positions and led the RSC that way that when we were sort of doing the last meeting together, somebody said, are we going to take positions? Jim said, we must have taken so many that it seems the norm now. But strong leadership, and it's a real honor to follow Jim.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Anything to add?
Yeah,
Sure.
The key to this is not cutting defense spending, but innovation, more autonomy in the military, retiring legacy military platforms that don't make any sense in a war with China or our enemies and adversaries that we face today. And Heritage is so good on this. I mean, what the work that you put out here at Heritage on how to innovate, how to get that done, really leads the way and forecasts to members of Congress what we need to do. I led a bipartisan report a couple of years ago on the future of defense, and it all came back to this. There's a clear way to do this. I also think about a friend of mine from Indiana, Lisa Hirschman, who was the chief management officer at the Pentagon, and she dived into this and tackled reforms that would create savings. They ran her out of town. They literally ran her out of town. The Pentagon did, and we got to go back to that way of thinking, those types of reforms, and make the reforms that save taxpayer dollars, but also allow us to innovate and the right technologies to help us compete.
Indeed, and that's precisely where I want Heritage to be. It's where we are, and we've got some work to do there in terms of being specific given the circumstances that we're in, and of course that specificity is all aimed toward making your jobs easier as you do them. So I think it's fitting that the last audience question be from our friend Ed Fulner. So he doesn't need a mic, but he's going to get one anyway.
Get one anyway. Thanks very much. And Jim, another shout out to you. When we started Heritage and the RSC at the same time, we always called it an inside-outside operation. You had to have the outside, both the ideas coming from the outside and the outside troops, while you were mobilizing the inside. And I want to thank you specifically for all you've done in terms of working with the outside groups in terms of your regular meetings, and I hope, Kevin, you're going to continue that. But my question is a specific one that's getting a lot of media attention and member attention. What's the RSC role going to be on oversight and accountability? How do you fit in there? I mean, you're going to keep pushing and sharpening the attack, the inquiries.
Yeah, I think that's a real important issue. I think when you're looking at, some of this all focuses back to China, right? I mean, a lot of this, if we're looking at China and certainly what's gone on in the election process, and there's no question that Jim Jordan is going to do a yeoman's amount of work on the judiciary, pushing back on that. By the way, I started to bring it with me. I've got Hunter's laptop. It's laying around here somewhere. But
Hunter's laptop is not at Heritage Day. I'm just being really clear.
I think Ed may have it. But no, so highlight those areas where we can. We certainly don't want to get out ahead of the committees, so long as the committees are moving forward. That's one of the concerns I had early on. I was part of Speaker McCarthy's transition team when it came to accountability, is that we make sure that the people who are doing oversight do oversight. And, if it's an accountability feature, they do that. When it comes to specific areas with the administration, doesn't mean we won't communicate on that. But we also we can't let that get in front of us doing great policy in the leadership position. And so I want us to be able to walk and chew gum, so to speak, that analogy. I think we're going to have a lot of places to hold. I think accountability also has another play in being accountable for a fiscally responsive nation, so that we don't continue down this pathway that we put ourselves in a bad place with China. I think the whole China issue is much bigger than most people think. We've got to figure out how we deal with China in a way that protects our national security and our economic relationship and still be able to function in a global economy. I think we're going to have to look at companies, how we hold them accountable for not doing bad things when given the opportunity and hiding behind some social media platform. So I think all of these things fit together, and we're going to be right there in the communication of what's going on the RSC.
So I'll give you the opportunity for some closing comments. And we always try to focus them on optimism. And there's still reason for optimism, but also next steps. And if I put myself in your shoes, Jim Banks, Kevin Hern, and we'll go in that order if you don't mind, I'm thinking, what can I get outside groups? Obviously, there are a lot of people here physically in the audience who do important things in the nation's capital, but we also have an online audience, perhaps people tuning in from outside DC. What can we collectively do to help you, as thoughtful members of Congress, achieve success this year?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the Heritage Foundation, Heritage Action, all of you for what you do. RSC would not have been successful this term without you. It is a inside-outside game relationship that's lasted for 50 years, and I believe that the best days still lie ahead for the movement, for Heritage, RSC, and for conservatives. So I'm hopeful because of what I've seen, and really do believe it's a new Republican Party. It's a new conservative movement. We're tougher. We're stronger than ever before because we understand what's at stake. We've learned a lot of lessons from Donald Trump during the Trump era that somebody told me early in my political life that you don't become a strong leader until you get punched in the face and have blood all over yourself. And if you served during the Trump era, you took a beating, right, from the left-wing media, from the swamp. and we learn from it, and we're in a better place because of it. So keep the Heritage Foundation, I believe, is fundamental to the strength of the conservative movement. And I've said it before, but under your leadership, the Heritage Foundation is stronger than I've seen it in my time on Capitol Hill. It's going to keep getting stronger, and I'm excited about being a part of it.
Thanks, Jim.
Let me close by my comments by actually passing the gavel. Thank you. I was prepared to be the Republican Study Committee because Mike Johnson, my predecessor, asked me to chair the Budget and Spending Task Force, and I learned so much from doing it. And when I asked Kevin Hern to do the same thing, I knew it would prepare him to be an even better chairman of the Republican Study Committee, to maintain that legacy that we have as the chief defenders of fiscal conservatism on Capitol Hill and the Republican Party. So I can't think of anybody better to be the chairman than Kevin Hern, and I'm excited to see what he does over the next 2 years. So
Thanks, Jim.
there you go.
Thank you. Kevin, in response, and certainly in Ed's reference to the inside-outside, in the majority, as I mentioned, it's really about bringing a lot of knowledge to the membership so that they feel capable of being able to respond to events that are occurring in real time without having to get independent voices. And what we're going to do in that realm, you mentioned the NDAA as an example of how I see in the next 2 years this working, is that we're going to invite in subject matter experts, Heritage, others, on particular issues to come in and enlighten the membership, not just freshmen, but everybody, on how a way to look at how we fund the defense, what's going on. Even our defense hawks, it'll be in there. We'll be hearing messaging. And then a follow-up meeting to that, maybe the very next meeting will be a Mike Rogers to come in and talk about what's going on with the NDAA. And some would argue, well, that's not till September. There's nothing wrong with getting your voices heard early in the process. Early and often is what my narrative has been as I ran for this position over the last year, as I talked to the chairs like Kathy McMorris Rogers and Mike Rogers and the various chairs of the committees, G.T. Thompson talking about the ag bill. So all these big bills that we know are called must pass, we're going to have to deal with those. And I want them to be the most conservative must pass bills that I've ever seen in Congress. And so the only way you can get that done is, uncomfortable as it may be for the chairs, they're going to follow an outside group that's come in and spoken to the conference the week before at lunch to get kind of level set on what's going on and what to be expected. And then the following week, we will have invited the chair to come in of that respective committee to start that dialogue, to get input from the 170 members of the RSC, and for them to give input back to them. And we'll start this dialogue along the way, because as Jim knows and Mark knows and others know, the way this usually works is we arrive on a Tuesday morning conference meeting at 9 o'clock and they say, we're going to be voting on the Farm Bill this week and we need your vote. And that's the extent of the education you get if you're not on the Ag Committee. We want to make sure that all 170 members of the RSC have had the ability to give input. So two things won't happen. One is the chair said, why are you telling me now? Because he or she has had time this entire year to come to the RSC and present and talk. And the second thing is the broader membership that are members of RSC can't say they didn't get a chance to give input. I think it'll make for a better conference. It'll be a more engaged conference. It'll be one that the American people can be proud of. And that's what it's all about when we get done, is that people are better legislators. The American people demand it.
Chairman Kevin Hern, Chairman Jim Banks, thanks for being here. Thanks for your service. Thank you for doing this event here. Would you all please join me in applauding the chair?
Thank you.